Hello everyone, this is Philosophy of the People with Ben Burgess and Stefan Bertram. Back after a relatively long absence, but at the same time every week on the weeks it happens. And this week we're going to be talking about dialectics. And can they break
Indeed.
bricks?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is really the problem because you think about the range of subjects that can be covered here, and there's no sharp distinction, but you figure philosophy is generally best at thinking through problems that are primarily conceptual, and you'd actually have to do an experiment, so you'd have to line up some bricks and see
Yeah, I
if
mean,
it.
instead of doing philosophy, they made a weird French film about it instead, and that's how I sorted it out.
Yeah, I actually, weirdly enough, I actually have seen that movie many years ago, but I did see it. They were doing like a showing up.
I don't know why more people haven't done that, because all they did was just dub a Korean movie into, I'm sorry, not even dub, just they changed the subtitles.
Yes,
More
exactly.
people should do that. I think it's a great idea to just have a film, just have fake subtitles, and then just tell a story of your own. Obviously, it'd be terrible if you actually speak Korean or whatever, but who cares about them?
Yeah. Well, I watched it, before my time living in Korea, so I suppose I would have been thrown if they'd actually used any of the 5 Korean words I know.
Yeah, like, they're going to be like, what?
Wait, what? But yes, that is a classic. The subtitles are about exactly what that name would indicate. But it's like it's been so long since I watched it. I mean, do you remember what the original movie is about, as far as you can tell?
The original movie is actually about like some kind of proletarian issue.
Okay,
It's about like a Korean farmers' revolt or something,
okay,
and then the French turned it into like high philosophy.
right, fair enough. Well, in any case, yeah, I don't. This isn't as cool as that. This
Oh,
is just
the original movie is about the anti-colonialist revolt in Korea.
okay. Gotcha. So it wasn't, so there wasn't a complete mismatch, between
It wasn't
obviously.
just about kicking people.
Right. Yeah, right. They didn't just find a random kicking people movie and put all this like Marxist theory jargon in the subtitles. There was something that it at least sort of loosely fit the plot. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, no, I saw that at a long gone radical bookstore in Lansing, Michigan, and like, I don't know, 19 years ago, something like that. Um, but in any case, in this essay, um, I am talking about dialectics, not so much their brick breaking abilities, but just the sort of general concept and how it fits into Marxist theory, and whether it's sort of all silly nonsense, or there's actually something there, more or less. So this is the other half. This is like the other side of the coin to an essay that I did a few weeks ago, which is actually the last time we talked, because there was an essay last week, but we didn't do an episode about it because I was driving back from the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'd been speaking at Jason Miles's book launch last Sunday, and then I think the Sunday before that there wasn't one. But yes, 3 weeks ago, I suppose, that essay came out, and that was sort of that one was kind of primarily devoted to pushing back against the sort of overstated or strange metaphysical claims that some people have made in the name of dialectics being dialectical, and arguing that that's a lot of that stuff doesn't really make sense. And this one is primarily devoted to the other way around, saying, okay, well, look, given that some of the more metaphysical overstated, weird, and probably can't be justified.
You've just suddenly entered a submarine or something.
Oh no.
Your audio just went like not kind of understandable, but like it sounded like you were in the most echoey room that had ever existed.
Oh, that's very strange. I wonder
And
if
you're
my
normal again now.
okay. Uh,
Sorry,
well,
this is growing up.
I will say my cat is jumping around in the background, so it's possible he dislodged something for half a second. That would be my best guess about that. But in any case, that's like, look, so given that some of the more sweeping metaphysical claims are implausible, then does that mean this is all just sort of silly nonsense? This, like, sort of maybe kind of an embarrassment if you generally like a lot of the rest of what Marx is up to, and think a lot of the rest of it can be salvaged, that it's just this sort of unfortunate artifact of his personal background, that he started out being really into Hegel and never quite got over it, and so that he sometimes expressed himself in those terms, but there's really nothing there, right? So that's the this one is primarily devoted to pushing back against that second view and saying, no, there is more than nothing there, that there is, so I kind of use that Richard Rorty quote that I also mentioned in the previous essay from A Spectre is Haunting the Intellectuals, where Rorty uh, sort of flippantly says, it's a pity that the best political economist of the 19th century happened to major in philosophy and never quite got over it. As
Pretty hard quote, regardless of whether we think it's true or not.
yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the man could definitely turn a phrase, but I kind of use that as a way of framing this question, right? Like, is it is it a is it just kind of this unfortunate thing about Marx's intellectual background, that that he kind of has this terminology and this that like the whole thing's sort of better off without it, or can that stuff actually lead you to having useful insights? And I think the second thing, and in order to sort of illustrate that, I talk about the debate between Marx and Proudhon. And because I just finished doing this class about Proudhon's the philosophy of poverty, or depending on the translation you look at, philosophy of misery, or the system of economic contradictions, and Marx's response, the poverty of philosophy, and there is actually a surprising amount of dialectic stuff in both of those.
Yeah, I mean, you do take kind of a like the centrist position in
Yeah.
this essay, where you do start by clarifying that it would seem strange that either Marx discovered the system which explains everything in the universe by reading some of Engels' reports on the state of working class of England in 1844, or perhaps even more strangely, if Hegel had discovered it all, but then kind of got it wrong, and then Marx sorted it out.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you believe what certainly Engels dabbled in believing with the dialectics of nature stuff, what Trotsky certainly seems to have thought, if you read his dialectics essay I talked about a few weeks ago, what people like George Novak, who I quoted in here, who's a theoretician from the American Socialist Workers Party, what what he thought. Like, if you think what these guys thought, that dialectics is maybe understood in terms of those principles from that Engels lays out in the Anti-Düring about quantity turning into quality, and the negation of the negation, and and all that stuff, that this is this sort of just general fact about absolutely everything, then it does kind of seem like it must be one of those two things, right? I mean, I don't really know, like, either this is something that Marx somehow discovered that is just sort of this happy, strange coincidence, that it
Yeah,
happened.
obviously it could be that he's just revealing something in kind of something which is inherent in the universe. But if so, why was he either the first or second guy to get it?
Yeah, right. And again, like how is it that he figured this out exactly? And you know, or even more confusingly, if Hegel's the one who figured it out, but he got it wrong, right? Remember, Marx had to stand it on its head, right? How the hell did Hegel figure it out? And then after he figured it out, right, how did he mess it up? Um, these are, either one of these would be an incredibly confusing claim. And, I think tellingly, most people who talk like this um, don't really see the epistemology of it, the like, how do we know of it, as even an issue that they have to discuss, right? I remember years ago reading a collection of essays by C.L.R. James, who overall I actually like quite a bit, where he has this kind of throwaway line about how, well, you'll notice don't provide a lot of arguments for dialectical materialism, but you just sort of see that you just kind of have to see if the analysis that it produces, makes sense or something like that. And it's like, okay, but I mean, that surely can't be enough, because like if so, we could just say that about anything, right? That like that just pick your favorite theoretical framework, and I'm not going to provide any arguments for it, but I'm going to sound really confident when when I talk about it. And
You apply it to lots of things in ways which are kind of vague.
yeah, I'm going to apply it to lots of things in ways that leave myself plenty of wiggle room, but I'm going to say it all very elegantly and confidently. Like that cannot possibly be the standard. Um, so, so I am skeptical about the general claims, the general claim, right? Not that like bits or pieces of this might not interestingly map onto lots of interesting phenomena, perhaps, I'm sure, right? But that there's just sort of like, what I'm skeptical about is the idea that there's some sort of general reason to suppose that everything works like this. I don't see what that reason would be. So given that, it kind of sounds like I should be agreeing with Rorty. The reason that I don't is that I actually think that whatever else this might or might not describe, a lot of what this framework will sort of prime you to pay attention to, a lot of the sort of basic structure of it actually is a pretty decent description of one very specific thing, right? Which is the ways that modes of production have risen and fallen over the course of human history. And that's not nothing, right? That's actually
Now,
quite a
I'm
bit.
quite interested in humans and their society.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's not like if it just the only thing it applied to was the I don't know, was the social
Like
structure of muskrats, right?
yeah, yeah. Like
I don't really
I've,
care that
I've
much about
recently been learning
muskrats.
about the social structure of hyenas, and it's very complicated. They're very smart and quite brutal too.
Sure.
And it'd be very interesting if you had a theory which could explain just that, but not quite in the same way that Marxism is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Apologies to um, all the hyena sociologists in the audience. We value your work. It's just not our primary area of interest. So yeah, I do think that, and I think some of this comes out when you look at Proudhon versus Marx, which of course is also pretty interesting in and of itself. Proudhon is this sort of massively important figure in the early history of socialism. He's like like a lot of people like that. He's sort of now mostly remembered for Marx's criticisms of him, but
He was the first guy to ever be told that he doesn't know what dialectics are.
yeah, not the last. Uh, or or the thousandth from the last, because it's often unclear, famously. But yeah, if anybody has watched the Christopher Nolan movie Oppenheimer, there is this, I think, at least infamous in some circles, goof in that movie where uh, Oppenheimer is at uh, a communist party in the 1930s. It's like party members and fellow travelers, and um, and somebody brings up Marx, and Oppenheimer says, "Oh, I've read Marx. I've read Capital, all 3 volumes." And so, what do you think? Well, I think a lot of it makes sense, and that he quotes property as theft, which is not Marx. That would be Proudhon, right? From What is Property? 27 years before the first volume of Capital came out. And it's also very much not Marx's way of expressing
I mean, it
himself.
would be a great line if it was something that like the character was intentionally meant to get wrong because he was trying to impress like cute girls at the party,
Right.
a la like Obama in college.
Right. Exactly. Yes. With the ethereal bisexual. Yeah. I mean, I guess that is the most charitable reading of it, that in the world of the movie, Oppenheimer has not in fact read Capital. He vaguely heard that somewhere. And then, nobody at the party, wants to make, this like famous physicist fellow traveler, feel uncomfortable by pointing out that he got it wrong.
Yeah.
But in any case, Proudhon's earlier tract, What is Property, where that line actually comes from, is an attack on capitalist property rights. I've seen the claim that, it seems to have actually reading that may have been, influenced a young Karl Marx, from being already this, young Hegelian democratic revolutionary to actually becoming a socialist. Certainly, when Marx was in Paris after is it the Neue Rheinische Zeitung, was shut down, if I'm getting this right. So he, during the years of Paris exile, before he finds his, final exile in London, he was friends with Proudhon. They spent a lot of time talking. Because the one of the articles I was looking at this about said, well, they didn't really have that much in common, but they're both really interested in Hegel and socialism.
Yeah.
And then in the late 1840s, Proudhon's second, his follow-up tract, the second confession, he calls it, comes out. The philosophy of poverty, or possibly one of those other titles. I think the original French is like, I'm not going to do it in French because when I try to pronounce French words, it sounds very funny. The system of economic contradictions, or the philosophy of misery, or whatever. But anyway, the philosophy of poverty, just for parallelism, we'll call it that. The philosophy of poverty comes out, and Marx gets very pissed off about this, and he writes this response. As anybody who's ever seen the movie The Young Karl Marx will have seen, the poverty of philosophy. And if you read them back to back, you can read at least the part of the philosophy of poverty that's available in English on Marxist.org, and also the poverty of philosophy at the same place. Then you do notice that they're disagreeing about a lot of other things, but the Hegel dialectic stuff comes up in a surprisingly big way. So to give a little bit of more general Yes, to Charles's comment, I will cop to being a liberal revisionist Khrushchevite. Um, but
Wasn't it written like 5 minutes ago?
what's that?
Wasn't that written like 10 minutes ago?
Oh yeah, probably. I just happen to notice that the way Restream does the comments, they don't just. It's not like StreamYard where they just go by the once. They
Yeah,
like
yeah,
cycle back around.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but yes. In any case, yeah. So like the larger context, I should say, for Proudhon versus Marx has to do with three things that are all going to be related, right? So disagreements about economics, disagreements about history, and disagreements about dialectics. And certainly in Marx's mind, these were all very closely related to each other. Um, so on economics, if you read the philosophy of poverty, Proudhon can be frustratingly vague about some of this stuff. I mean, frankly, there are points where he writes like a caricature of a French intellectual, that there's like a lot of sort of layers of irony and vagueness. And it's like, yes, but what are you actually saying? Right. But he strongly, but he's criticizing on the one hand defenders of the status quo, and on the other hand, people he calls communists, which, of course, you don't want to be anachronistic about this in context. The communists, what he means by the communists are like the people that Engels would call utopian socialists, the, Owenites, people like that. And in his criticism of, the communists, there's a lot of this where I think as a contemporary reader, it can get easy to get mixed up about what Proudhon's point is because, uh, there are parts of this where he like almost writes like just like a libertarian. That and but as a matter of fact, he's extremely critical of capitalism. Again, what is property? Right? It's where he says, property is theft, all that stuff. But he's also critical of the Owenites and all those kinds of people for thinking we can do without, markets and sort of people being incentivized by individual self-interest. And he doesn't buy any of that stuff, right? And he does have a certain kind of respect for the economists, um, who he sees as kind of having an important point, as like that they like understand important things about how economies really work, and how the unintended consequences of attempts to meddle with how they work and so on. And so ultimately, Proudhon's argument, as best as I can understand it, is that on the one hand, you have the socialists who want a more equal society. On the other hand, you have the economists who have this realist understanding of how economies work that creates all kinds of problems for that. And that sort of the back, that like the economists get some stuff right, the socialists get some stuff right, and you need to kind of understand both to to understand like how we can sort of reasonably figure out how to achieve equality. And crucially, he sees this, he talks about this in this kind of weirdly ahistorical way in a
I
lot
mean,
of it.
this is a bit I found very interesting.
Yeah. Like he sort of projects both of these types, the economists and the socialists, back through history. There's even like a passage where he sort of suggests that like the Plato Aristotle distinction is like an early form of this, because Plato is a utopian and Aristotle's a realist.
So
Um,
like kind of ahistorical and eternal, but also progressive. Like we apparently conclude these issues as we go.
yeah. So I think there is a specific sense, like It is progressive. It's not like, so he's not ahistorical in the sense that he thinks that nothing ever changes. But he is, I think, ahistorical, certainly from Marx's perspective, in his view that there's a certain sense in which, like, the ground on which all this happens doesn't really change.
Mm.
That, in other words, the things that progress over time are that economic science gets better, right? We have a better understanding of how economies, work, and what the consequences of doing different things are going to be. And then also there are these sort of, in a winding roundabout way, society is eventually finding its way towards equality. And this is also a very weird thing that Proudhon does in his book, where he talks about society, like he anthropomorphizes society as this, like, vast individual, right? He calls Prometheus.
Yeah, which I
And
find very like early 19th century esoteric,
yeah,
like
yeah, right.
much more kind of like applicable to the kind of Marxism is actually uh, Gnosticism or whatever kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, no, somebody should tell Lindsay to get all excited about this. Yeah, right. So yes, Prometheus. Actually, especially because Proudhon is, like, very weird about the God question. Like, this is the part where he sounds most like a parody of a French intellectual. It's like there's a lot of, like, at the beginning of that book, there's a lot of like, well, uh, God definitely exists, by which I mean that God does not exist, by which I mean, it's like, what the hell are you saying right now? Um, but yeah, so Prometheus gradually figures this stuff out over the course of time, even though it takes him a long way to get there, and some of the sort of moves, might actually lead to, more inequality on the way. But this is where they're ultimately going. And Marx, moving to the third level, we'll get back to history in just a second, and then economics too. But Marx gives him a particularly hard time about having misunderstood Hegel, basically. So Proudhon definitely wants to be a dialectics guy. He uses all this kind of quasi-Hegelian language about thesis and antithesis and antinomies and all this stuff. And yes, I know Hegel doesn't actually use those first two terms, but lots of people, including Marx, have used them to describe what Hegel was saying. And in fact, Proudhon even says something funny about how this thesis, antithesis, antinomy stuff, that he trusts that before too long, we'll start teaching people this in primary school, because it's so obviously true and important. But Marx basically accuses him of missing the entire point of the whole thing. That he says, sorry, I was reading the chat. He says that Proudhon is taking the idea of this sort of interplay, this push and pull of opposed forces, that the progress of which, the conflict between which drives things forward, and he's just kind of taking it, turning it into this sort of static evaluation of what Marx caustically calls the good side and the bad side of things. And Marx even has a funny line in there that's something like, he says he's like it's something like, is like the petty bourgeois simpleton who would say, well, Napoleon had his good side and his bad side,
Napoleon only had a good side.
I don't know. I haven't seen the film yet, so the jury's still out on that.
It's
Uh,
fucking shit, mate. Disaster.
yeah.
We'll talk about it at the end.
I also know there's like a much longer version that's going to hit streaming, so I'm a little bit undecided about whether to just wait for that or watch the possibly incoherent 2.5 hour theater
Well,
cut.
with the movie, I like checked my watch when Waterloo started because I was like, I'm sick of this.
Yeah. Fair enough. Uh, well, in any case,
But yeah,
you
the
know,
Proudhon thing reminds me of a Foucault quote where he talks
uh,
about, humanity does not progress gradually from combat to combat until it arrives at universal reciprocity. But it feels like Proudhon is saying, like, actually, it does.
yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, that'd be a good. Anybody who reads existential comics, I feel like that exchange between Proudhon and Foucault might be a good existential comic. But
But it also just reminds you because, Foucault is always kind of in the background of Foucault as a critique of Marx. I'm just wondering if it's another case where someone thinks they're critiquing Marx, but actually they're just critiquing Proudhon.
yeah, I wonder. Um, yeah, that's fun. I have to think about that. But yeah, I mean, I think that so essentially, what Proudhon is doing, or certainly what Marx accuses Proudhon of doing, is sort of recasting dialectics into this process where the big collective Prometheus is has this problem to be solved, and the problem to be solved is how to keep the good side of various phenomena while getting rid of the bad side. And so Marx, quotes different things that Proudhon says about, like, division of labor, good side, it's makes everything much more efficient. Bad side, it's like psychologically stultifying to to have to do the same repetitive tasks all the time. And that this sort of the sort of historical process of progress is the process of figuring out how to how to keep the good side while ditching the bad side. And so really how to achieve this goal of equality while while dispensing with without like economic disaster, basically. Um and so I think that the place where this all really comes to a head, and I think the sort of three levels, the economics, the history, and the philosophy, um, sort of come to bear in maybe the most interesting way, is that one of Proudhon's defenses of markets, um, and is about the French Revolution. And I should say really quickly, just on the general subject of Proudhon and markets. So again, Proudhon doesn't go into any detail in the philosophy of poverty about, or at least the part of it that's available in English, certainly about what his alternative to capitalism looks like. But from what I've been able to tell elsewhere, Proudhon, prefers to call that alternative to capitalism mutualism. And roughly the idea behind mutualism is, okay, we're rejecting capitalist property rights in favor of some sort of like occupancy and use norms that, who gets what, has to do with, who's actually there and using it. Um, so there is an obvious challenge to capitalist property rights in there, because, if if you're like a group of workers at a factory in Lyon, and then you would have a better claim to that factory than somebody in Paris who has a piece of paper, entitling them to it. Um, and so and Proudhon is also, it's a little ambiguous and weird, but is often seen as the father of anarchism, and he certainly does talk very anarchistically sometimes. And so, Proudhon doesn't like, the police power that's enforcing this monopoly, which is kind of his name for like standard capitalist property claims. And he thinks that, in his preferred setup in the future, you'd have uh, independent artisans and, collectives of workers or whatever, who are all using this sort of bottom up like mutual exchange bank, are trading with each other, and um, you know Proudhon is also a big value theory guy, so it's very important to him. Everybody's keeping the full value of what they produce, and so I've seen this described as in some ways, Proudhon, I mean, he's sort of anticipating both, but it's sort of a halfway point between later kind of individualist and collectivist forms of anarchism. Um, the kind of anarcho-communism of an Emma Goldman or Alex Berkman or Kropotkin or any of those people on the one hand, and sort of individualist anarchism that might be very pro-market or whatever on the other hand. So that's Proudhon's perspective. I don't even necessarily disagree that the kind of socialism that we would sort of logistically know how to create in the short term, might have to retain some market mechanisms in some sectors of the economy. But I do think the idea that you could just sort of rip down the state and hope that the result is sort of mutuality and egalitarianism
I mean,
is.
why does he think? Why doesn't he think that Prometheus has kind of decided against small traders, as small traders were getting like blown the fuck out during his life?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? This seems to be there seems to be some pretty wild cherry picking here, because it does seem not unreasonable to think that part of what's driving this, I think certainly what I think drove some people to accept this, if you think about Proudhonites in the early socialist movement, is precisely that that they sort of that this was a very appealing view to people who were like small artisans who wanted to hold on to that, right? But yeah, no, excellent question.
I mean, I don't know why, but the love for kind of small businesses endures incredibly strongly in kind of the modern human mind, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I mean, I kind of get it. Like, it's I mean, one certainly, I think one big thing is just that there's a desire for for a kind of autonomy that small business owners have, that obviously workers don't have. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
that.
I can never find the quote, but Marx has a section where he talks about the sole producer and
Uh,
makes clear that the sole producer was not actually like much like more free than the proletarian, because the sole producer was kind of basically like strapped into his workroom, and
yeah,
by like the necessities of work. And it was a necessity which, like as we experience now with people
uh,
who are academics and stuff like this, who where the work never really ceases, where you choose when to work, but functionally this means that you're never off the clock.
I
Like
mean,
the ability to choose to work means that you don't have
I
the
don't
ability to
know.
choose not to work.
I don't know what that would be like, but it sounds awful. Uh, yeah, yeah, right. if, no, I mean, the even better thing would be that if like hypothetically, if you were to like, uh, you know, be a small business owner, like you had like a podcast and YouTube channel, for example, and then, but then you also spent like half of your time writing articles for Jacobin, which are also things that you could choose when to do, but you have to. But you end up spending it all day doing it. Writing a Substack. But yeah, no,
I think the only times where it's actually nice to be a small business owner is with those small business owners, which aren't like what the nice thing we imagine, which is people who just don't do any work but own a business.
Yeah. I mean, really, the fantasy is that you feel some sort of sense of worth and accomplishment because you're working a little bit, but
Yeah,
like,
you like do the taxes, which like lay out like in a Marxist, almost Marxist way, exactly how much surplus labor you're getting.
yeah, um, yeah, that's. I mean, I think that. So I think Marx is right about that. I think that I will say. I mean, I wrote an article a couple of years ago for Jacobin about the sort of phenomenon of like all of these incredibly popular books and courses and YouTube videos about how to start your own business. And again, I think the desire for a certain kind of autonomy is huge there. Like there's um, like the phrase that you see the most often in all this literature and et cetera, is be your own boss, right? Like that's what people want, right? That they don't have a boss over them, that they're the decision maker. Now, pretty clearly, in practice, the small business owning life, because it's small, and so it requires your constant energy. That's
Right. I mean, if a
like
man isn't your boss, then capital is your boss.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's a yeah. I mean that yeah. I mean that there is a sort of like there is a sort of general servitude to the market itself. Is like there's this famous passage in Volume 3 where Marx talks about as the talks calls it a blind power that seems to dictate everything. And it's I think you could definitely see his point, right? That it's like even if we achieve some sort of market socialism, there's still there's still a sort of sense in which that kind of dominance hasn't been overcome, right? And if and this is a reason why this is the kind of thing like Lee Phillips talks about the end of People's Republic of Walmart, that why to when you can sort of see ways to go further into more of a full communisty sort of direction without sacrificing other things you care about. Why you might want to push forward in that direction. I'll also say that the sort of anarchist version of that kind of market mutualism that Proudhon has is maybe the least appealing possible version of it to me, because if there's no state, presumably there's no welfare state. So that's
Yeah, I mean that's what I thought when Proudhon was like, "Well, actually, let's all have everything we produce." And it's like, "Well, fuck your grandma."
yeah, exactly, right. That's yeah. If you get I mean, this is the sort of thing, of course, much later after Proudhon died, but this is the sort of point that Marx would later be making in Critique of the Gotha Program and in one of the footnotes of Capital, where it's like, no, come on, guys, there's no possible system in which the immediate producers can keep everything. The question is the real question is who gets to decide who else gets what, not does anybody else get any, because that would be just a crazy thing to say. No, because then what, grandma starves to death unless or
Yeah, and presumably Proudhon's answer would be, well, obviously people will do that. It just won't be kind of imposed by a system. But that is like again like a very neoliberal answer. That's like David Cameron big society stuff.
yeah, right, totally. And to be fair, of course, the the welfare state was essentially didn't exist in this era. Although, to be even fairer, like Marx certainly saw the need for it. I mean, one of the lines of the discussion in the Critique of the Gotha Program is like, he says what we now call poor relief would surely exist to a much greater extent, not a lesser one, under
Yeah, I mean,
socialism.
I was going to say in England we kind of did have a welfare system with poor rates and so on, where basically it was just done kind of on. It wasn't done by the central state, but it was done by kind of each borough or whatever.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think there was like a national mandate for that to be done.
yeah, it was the law you had to do that, like, and then it was the councils. Well, whatever they were called back then, they weren't called the councils. They
Right.
had the responsibility to then, raise the money and spend it.
Yeah, I actually
And
just
it
read.
led to a lot of drama because you were
Yeah.
responsible for the people in your area, but obviously you could get them to go away, like we do with homeless people now.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Um, yes. Which. Yeah, I actually just finished reading this book called "The Blazing World" about mostly the English Civil War. It goes from James the First to the Glorious Revolution, and there's some like very funny, stuff in there about like various writers in like the late 1600s who were mad about poor relief in ways, in ways that sort of make them sound like 21st century right wingers. That nobody wants to work anymore. This is the charter for the lazy and indulgent. So, um, but yeah, right. So there was like just the very beginnings of one, right? And like Marx certainly thought, yes, under socialism you'd want much more of this. You'd want much more, not less. Assistance for people who, for whatever reason, weren't working. Um, so yes, that's all. Those were all good questions. I'm also just, I also have a footnote in here, kind of grumbling about the just a couple of general things about anarchy, like any form of anarchism that I find implausible. And I think if you add markets to it, it gets sort of more implausible. That's, I don't think, I think that the idea that like we can sort of forego like institutional society wide decision making and just kind of hope that good things will spontaneously result from that is fairly implausible, right? Generally speaking, people disagree about stuff, and you do need some mechanism for resolving those disagreements and deciding what happens.
And I
But
don't like the sound of resolving them by voting with my dollar. I feel like
yes,
there's perhaps better systems.
yes, that is one of the worst ones. If you're voting with your dollars,
I don't have very many dollars.
yes, exactly, yes. And even if we start out with the same number of dollars, if we're in if we're imagining a stateless society, in which there aren't any kind of like institutional guardrails against the reemergence of inequality, I'm pretty skeptical that it won't reemerge, especially if you have markets, because markets have
Yeah, I
winners and
mean, because
losers.
obviously some
That's
people are
how they
more
work.
productive than others.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right. And, calamities happen and,
And
whatever.
is there any way in Proudhonism to make sure you can't do inheritance? Like, surely if your
Oh,
children are also using the bigger house you've made, which has the best industrial machine in it, whatever, throughout their life, then what does anything stop you from passing on your advantage to your children, and so on and so on and so on?
that is a very, very good question. I have to say, he doesn't specifically address that in the philosophy of poverty, or again, I keep saying, the part that's available in English that I've seen, but it sure feels like he would be against some any sort of attempt to like prevent people from leaving things to children. Fun fact, by the way,
Yeah, like surely he can't like ever oppose you passing something from like hand to hand.
yeah, right, that all seems fine,
That's
right?
the least alienated kind of exchange possible.
Totally, yeah. So it seems like you would have to be fine with it. Yeah, this is fun fact, by the way, at the end of 2020. I had I realized I later realized I miscounted, but but I thought that at the end of 2020, it was like December 29th or something, that I had written 51 articles that year, and I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. Uh, and it's a very silly thing to be, annoyed at, but it's like I nevertheless. So I like emailed a couple of editors, Jacobin. I'm like, hey,
We
this
need to get 52.
can I do something really quickly in the next couple of days so I can get to 52? And I think Sean Goody had the idea that I should write something about inheritance, which I did. And then I believe this is why I wrote it. And I believe that turned out to be my most viewed ever article on Jacobin, because a bunch of, like the last I heard, there were like 500,000 views or something on that article, because a bunch of right wingers got mad about it and like hate shared it and did videos about it. So it's called Abolish Inherited Wealth. And, you can speculate for yourself why that's one that hit a nerve. But yeah, certainly the line I take in there is that it's like, look, if you want a long-term equal society, you better not have inheritance, because, come on, right? And so, yeah, I think these were all very, very good objections to Proudhon, but, but something that's maybe even more objectionable is that when Proudhon is making his, arguments for his view, this sort of mutualism rather than communism, um, one, some of them are arguments that you might expect that, have to do with human nature and things like that. But one of them is from the authority of the French Revolution, that the French Revolution, proclaimed, free trade along with all the other liberties that were being proclaimed, and it's just absurd to try to reverse this historical progress, right? So again, he seems to take it, he doesn't use this exact phrase in there, but it's like this is like one of Prometheus's settled judgments. And Marx takes him to task for this in The Poverty of Philosophy in exactly the way that you would expect him to, right? On exactly the grounds you would expect him to. That he says, well, hold on, right? Just because it sort of people in the 18th century did this in order to meet the historical needs of their time, that doesn't mean that other people in the 19th century, to meet their historical needs, shouldn't do the opposite.
I
And
mean, I feel like Proudhon would have a point if you'd said basically like, well, it seems unlikely that we're going to get rid of free trade like right now because it's literally just happened. And
yes,
if it
that would
has a
be,
historic role, then it's probably hasn't played out yet. But that wasn't what he was saying. It
yeah,
was kind
yeah,
of the
yeah,
opposite of what he was saying.
yeah, exactly, right. It's like, oh, this is this, 6 decades later, this is etched into the fabric of the universe now. Seems to have been the actual argument. Whereas you're like, come on, man, it's only been 6 decades. What do you think the chances are that we're ready for the next thing yet? Would be a much better argument. But I think on this argument, Marx has him dead to rights. And I also think that if you sort of reflect on this difference a little bit, I think you do actually see why, going back to the title, I think it's actually a good thing that the best political economist of the 19th century was a philosophy major and never quite got over it. Because the fact that Marx has these Hegelian lenses that that he tends to see things in terms of this dialectical process of you know opposing elements within a system, uh, duking it out, and then this transforming whatever you started with and creating a new situation that in turn have their own opposing elements, that etc. Right, this whole sort of structural framework that he's getting from Hegel. um there's no guarantee of this, but I think it does just happen to be the case that this turned out to be some pretty useful lenses for looking at human history. and this is leading him to, I think, have a clearer view of things than Proudhon has. Um, that he sees that that the um, like this whole framework where Marx can see, okay, what was the revolutionary class in a past era, like that these aren't just sort of things that humanity, realized in the late 18th century that it needed, and now we're waiting for the next realization, which will just build on that one, right? But rather, this is a expression of this historical phase, because this ascendant class in the late 18th century, that was the revolutionary class at the time, is now the reactionary class, and the thing that would actually move history forward is the victory of the workers against it, and they have completely different historical needs. That I think this is a vastly more useful framework for understanding history. I think seeing things this way is going to lead you to get a lot more stuff right, and it's going to provide you with a much more useful roadmap than the sort of collective humanity figuring stuff out view that Proudhon has. And I think it is a direct consequence of the fact that he has this dialectical framework. Now, ultimately, I do still think that when you look at the claims that are made in that language, that you do have to be able to parse those claims in terms of ordinary cause and effect in order to make sure that, like, no, this actually does make sense here, right? That, like, I am saying something that's right and that I have a good argument for, and all that stuff. And that needs to be hashed out on a case by case basis. But yeah, I think, ultimately, ultimately dialectics, or the materialist kind of dialectics, is good. It might not be able to break bricks, but it can certainly help you understand history.
I was going to say, if they're material enough to break bricks, then we like them.
Fair enough.
So the Napoleon movie was fucking terrible.
Okay, do tell. Yeah.
My friend asked me what I was kind of wishing for and expected for, and I didn't anticipate this to be in the movie, but I thought there was like maybe a 5% chance it would be in, and at least there would be like some political references. But I said to my friend that, I hoped in the movie they would talk about Napoleon's emancipation of the Jews.
Uh-huh.
But the movie rather is so apolitical, it can't be counter-revolutionary. Like, there are just no politics in the movie at all. And
Uh-huh.
what?
Oh, sorry, you were saying?
Everything that Napoleon does in the movie, he does because he's getting cucked. All of his major choices, he leaves Egypt because he's getting cucked. He leaves Elba because he's getting cucked.
Oh.
He's completely socially inept. I don't know if he's meant to have like autism or what Ridley Scott was thinking, but he's like, there's towards the end of the movie he has the famous scene where he goes before the soldiers and opens up his chest and like, if anyone wants to shoot the emperor, shoot me, and if not, come and join me. But in the movie universe, there's no way that scene makes sense because he's the least charismatic man in history. Like, everything he does is just so awkward and weird. And
Yeah.
the battle scenes are absolutely terrible. And the rest of it doesn't make up for it. The only interesting person is Josephine, his wife, Empress Josephine. But that's only done by kind of making him so pathetic and useless. Like, the thing is, it's this kind of thing of like, there's Napoleon the man and there's Napoleon the world spirit. And I'm not really interested in Napoleon the man. I don't want a movie about Napoleon the man. I want a movie about Napoleon, the world spirit. And in this movie, it kind of shows him doing the actions of Napoleon, the world spirit, but only because he's Napoleon the man. Like he conquers all of Europe because he came back from Egypt because he was getting cooked.
Which, as far as I can tell, would be. I mean, I guess I'm not sure about the cucking, but the as far as I can tell, is close to exactly the opposite. That as soon as certainly after the certainly by the time of the Brumaire coup, and after that, it seems like you know Napoleon the man barely existed. I mean, the guy spent like 18 hours a day working. Like was just you know constantly because I mean thinking about and micromanaging every aspect of his empire. So yeah, that's that.
They never name Marshal Ney the whole time. He's standing there with like Marshal Ney's face, but he's never once gets named. And Napoleon never like he's just like a conduit for orders. Like Napoleon never has a conversation with him. Uh, so
Yeah.
again, for watching the 5 hour version when it comes out on streaming, the thing about the current version is it does seem ponderous and slow, but at the same time incredibly rushed. For instance, like the the Italian campaign completely doesn't exist. The big battle he has in Russia lasts like 60 seconds. The guerrilla campaign in Russia is also given 60 seconds. It's stunning what he's produced. Really, it's kind of impressive in how much of a strange mess it is.
Yeah, especially because you'd think Ridley Scott of all people. I mean, if you want like a uh, if you want like a big sort of epic sweep Napoleon movie, this seems like the guy who should give it to you.
Yeah, I was optimistic, but it wasn't even very loud. I remember how loud June was, and then this
Yeah.
movie was really not loud at all. Um, Someone asked earlier, um, would you two be open to doing a libertarian episode? I think that'd be a fun essay to put on your docket for eventually to do one on self ownership, the idea of self ownership, whether that's a concept which makes any sense. I don't know if you've ever written about it before.
I don't think I actually have. I have written about it. So, yeah, I'd be actually. You know what? That's a good idea. I because I do think I have a view on this, right? Which is that, like, personal autonomy and, your rights to your body and all of that are extremely important, but, it's not, but, the, like a sort of bourgeois ideology to mix that idea up
Yeah, to
with the
frame it in
idea.
terms of is owning it like you own a house.
Exactly. It's like property ownership, right?
Yeah.
And
Instead, I don't own my body; I just am my body.
yeah, exactly, right. I have it's like, yeah, it's definitely because you sort of there are different ways in which somebody can have rights over something and ownership. Now I think the boundaries of ownership are a little vague because more than anything, these are really defined by legal systems. But ownership is a concept that mostly arises with regard to trade, right? And one, I don't actually think, yeah, uh, no, thank you.
I mean,
I
I think an age of consent episode would be pretty boring.
Yeah,
We
I
probably just
really don't.
rub like it's kind of arbitrary. We need to draw a line somewhere, and probably the lines that we currently have are about right.
Yeah, no, that would be exactly my position on that. I mean, it's also, you know, I mean, yeah, there is a certain thing that, like, I think some libertarians like to do where they're like, oh, but it is so arbitrary. Like, what's the difference if it's like, a month sooner or later? To which my two responses would be, one, you're committing the continuum fallacy. If this is supposed to be a reason to sort of reject the idea of an age of consent, that blurry lines doesn't mean that you don't have clear distinctions, between clear cases on either end. And of course, legal systems, as you say, have to have a line somewhere. And then my second response is just the unabashedly statist one, that people who talk this way should probably be on watch lists.
Yeah, what do people expect from the law? Of
Yeah,
course, it's like an arbitrary sword point, which just kind of separates things on an arbitrary line. Like, what else is it going to be?
because you have to, because it's like, if you want to be ruled by laws instead of ruled by the whims of judges, then you better have some arbitrary distinctions in there
I
somewhere.
mean, I do think there is a thing in kind of American culture, especially kind of American right wing culture, which thinks that kind of the law and legal interpretation and judges can kind of affix into law like the real reality of liberty and freedom in some kind of totality of a way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Fair enough, but yes, but the self ownership thing I think is interesting, because I do actually uh, I do actually think that this is an important point, right? Like, that this is essentially what Marx is talking about in the beginning of the Communist Manifesto, that about all human relationships
Mhm. Yeah,
being
yeah.
reduced to a cash nexus. That it's like, no, yeah, you do have very important rights over yourself, your body, right? I think it would be I obviously care about abortion rights, for example. That would be which is surely primarily a question of bodily autonomy. I would be horrified by, like, non-consensual organ transplants, but um, even if you were being left with one kidney, so you'd be okay. Uh, but but I also think that, in fact, I believe the new guy in Argentina has talked about, like, I don't think this is
Legalizing organ sales.
legalizing organ sales, right? And this is, I think, where the rubber meets the road on whether you see these rights that you have over your body as a form of ownership, right? That the because also, for that matter, I mean, if it's a question of
Right. They basically seem like versus seeing yourself as identical to yourself and thus giving you
right,
some rights versus seeing your body as something you own seems to only legalize bad things like slavery and organ sales and
yeah.
selling your
Why
children.
shouldn't why shouldn't you be able to sell yourself into slavery if it's a question of property rights? If I own something, like, normally part of what that means is that I can, if I so choose, sell it.
And
Um,
in slavery doesn't have to be like an internal contract with no ways of getting out or whatever. Most slavery in history is not being American chattel slavery or whatever. It
uh,
was quite normal, like in Rome and Greece and so on. It was normal to buy yourself out of slavery. So there can't be an objection then that there's something about slavery which means it necessarily abolishes the idea of this ownership distinction. Because I think the libertarians do have a point where they say, well, you can't sell yourself into slavery because at that point you give up all your rights and it doesn't really kind of make sense. But the system doesn't have to be one where you immediately go from like Western citizen to American chattel slave.
yeah, and those other forms of slavery are also bad.
Bad.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna take.
The reason I highlight this comment because do you know who practices primogeniture? Hyenas. They actually practice ultramogeniture, where basically the youngest female pup inherits the whole thing when her mother dies, which seems crazy a system for a non-human animal to have because even humans in Europe didn't manage to establish sole inheritance laws until like the 11th century after having like hundreds of years of crisis of medieval realms splitting upon the death of the ruling monarch. So I think hyenas are at least as well developed as kind of Dark Age Europeans.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. Um, Awesome. Yeah, this is
They often did have salaries. Well, not salaries, but they had wages. Like for
Yeah,
instance, in Athens, the distinction between being a slave and a wage laborer was, as a slave, you definitely had to give some of your wages up to your owner.
yeah. I mean, there have been, yeah. So, I mean, if you own somebody, you typically don't have to pay them anything. There are some,
Yes.
there have been some slave systems. Huh, you know what? I take it back. I take back what I said earlier. I now find hyena sociology pretty interesting. Uh, but uh, but yeah, I mean, there certainly have been systems where sometimes slaves are given a little bit of spending money, or sometimes slaves are allowed to like spend 1 day a week, like uh, running some little stall in the market on their own from what they grow in their
Yeah,
garden or
they get to be a
something.
proletarian for a day a week. Amazing.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, I mean, the idea, buying yourself out of slavery, there have been slave systems where that would make sense, but nonetheless, slavery seems pretty bad, and I'm not even sure I'm convinced by that sort of standard libertarian response that's like, well, uh, because because self ownership is so fundamental, you can't sell it away. It's like, well, you own yourself, or you don't. I don't know. This is a
Yeah, yeah. If you can't, it either becomes it either legalizes bad things, or it amounts to just being the same as the other thing. Which, in which case, I don't really see what the point of the distinction is.
yeah, exactly. So I I mean, it sort of look. I mean, there might be all sorts of things that after I sell them, I later regret it. But no standard libertarian would say, therefore, I have a right to reverse the sale.
For
Because
the vast majority of human civilization, there was no such thing as age of consent laws. Age of consent laws are like an invention of late modernity. The only concept of There was no concept of age of consent. It was just kind of sex which happened between married couples and sex which didn't.
yeah, um, right, and I think that marriage might not happen, although sometimes it did, before then. But like that's just because of fertility, right?
Yeah, no, like why would you marry a 12-year-old unless you're a pedophile?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's like, but anyway, yes, that is. I think that something about self ownership could be interesting. Let me mull that. I was going to, since I usually try to alternate the sort of Marxier topics with the more general philosophy topics week by week. My original thought, I haven't written it yet, but my original thought about next week was that I was going to talk about the Sabine Hassenfelder's claim that physics doesn't assume the existence of electrons. But I don't know. Maybe we'll do self ownership. I got some time to think about it.
But the uncurious Sabine Hosfelder.
Yes, that would be that would be like the yeah, like the names in Homer. It's the you know fleet-footed Achilles, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Uncurious Sabine Hassenfelder.
Cool. Well, we'll see you next week, friends. Bye.